Well, good afternoon, everyone. What we hope to accomplish this week is to pass the so-called doc fix bill. We're discussing a consent agreement that would give us an opportunity to have some votes on amendments on both sides and wrap that bill up today. It would be important to finish it today because the reductions in doctors' reimbursement would take effect at midnight tonight. So I think there's a bipartisan desire to move forward on that. I've asked Senator Fisher to join us to talk about an equal pay issue she's working on. You also know that the trafficking bill still seems to be hung up, and Senator Cornyn, who's the author of that, is here to discuss the latest effort to free that up. And as I've indicated before, once we get past trafficking, we'll move on to the Lynch nomination. And we'll also probably this week be dealing with going to conference on the budget. With that, let me turn to Senator Fisher.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Senator McConnell. Today is Equal Pay Day, National Equal Pay Day, and I wanted to highlight a proposal that you all got to see pass 3 weeks ago as an amendment in the budget process. It's a bipartisan proposal. Not only Republicans support it, but also Democrats. It really reinforces current law that we have and makes sure that the public understands that. It also has a non-retaliation clause in it that mirrors the president's executive action that he took a year ago with regards to public employees. That's an important part of it. As we always like to say, knowledge is power, and this gives that knowledge on salaries to all individuals in the workplace. I really want to stress that it is a bipartisan proposal. This is common sense. This is a proposal that will pass. And it's time that we move forward and do that. The perception is out there that equal pay is not in the forefront of people's minds. It is. We have a proposal that will pass on a bipartisan basis. So I am hopeful that our friends on the other side will give up on the sound bites and all the political posturing and really get down to work in passing a practical proposal that's going to offer more transparency to people. Thank you.
As Senator McConnell and a number of you have noted, we are on the cusp, I think, of a very productive work period over the next few weeks here in the United States Senate, thinking about the budget, things like Medicare reform, the Lynch nomination, the Iran issue, and Trade Promotion Authority. I think there's we're going to look back on this as one of the most productive periods the United States Senate has had in literally years, with one exception, unless we can get unstuck, as Leader McConnell said. For some inexplicable reason, Senate Democrats have chosen to filibuster a bipartisan bill that would do a lot to help the victims of human trafficking, typically a girl between the age of 12 and 14 years old in what has been called, appropriately so, modern-day human slavery. Why in the world would this get caught up in the partisan wars here in Washington, D.C.? Well, I've heard from our Senate Democrats what some of their concerns are, and we've made concrete proposals to try to address those concerns while maintaining the basic integrity of the bill. We would basically handle all of the funds that go into this Victims' Compensation Fund through the regular appropriations process, and we will use the same Hyde Amendment language that was negotiated between Nancy Pelosi and Speaker Boehner in the doc fix bill that we'll be voting on this afternoon. I don't know how in the world they could possibly object when we're answering, when responding to their concerns and saying, we're willing to work with you to address those in the interest of all of these victims of human trafficking. We'll find out. My hope is that the Senate rises to the challenge, just as we are on these other areas. Certainly, we need to get this done and get it done soon so we can get on to the vote, as the Majority Leader said, on nominations.
Senate Republicans are committed to getting Washington working again for the American people. And as has already been pointed out, we got the first budget that responsibly balances in a decade. We, this week, will work on getting through the SGR, something that's been hanging around here for almost 20 years and has already seen 17 short-term fixes in a 12-year period. If we can get, and I think we will, this afternoon, the Foreign Relations Committee will act on the Iran bill that allows the American people to have their voices to be heard and whether or not there ought to be an Iranian nuclear deal. And we're hoping very shortly to have a Trade Promotion Authority bill marked up in the Senate Finance Committee, which will be very good for our economy and very good for our farmers and ranchers and small business people and manufacturers here in this country. So there's a whole range of things that are getting done in a bipartisan way around here. This has been, as Senator Cornyn pointed out, this is a good period for the American people. The one thing that's being held up, it's a week-long filibuster on the anti-human trafficking bill. I hope that the Democrats will give up that filibuster, allow us to move that legislation forward as well. And there are lots of other things that are on our agenda to get done for the American people if we can get a little help from our friends on the other side of the aisle. So Republicans are committed to getting this place working again. I believe that's the case. Senator McConnell pointed out earlier today we've had 94 votes already in this Senate session of the Senate compared with 15 in the entire year last year.
This afternoon, the Foreign Relations Committee will be discussing and voting on a bipartisan bill dealing with the so-called Iranian deal. The President may want to hide what's in the deal, but in a bipartisan way, we want to make sure there is transparency and the American public gets to have their voices heard. We know that any deal with Iran has to be verifiable, has to be enforceable, has to be accountable. Now, we met earlier today with Senator Kerry and some from the administration. There were goals that had been started with in terms of the negotiations. Based on what I've heard from Senator Kerry, the administration has fallen woefully behind in their goals and has actually moved the goalpost. The administration has actually promised, and the President has said that his goal was to end Iranian's nuclear program, dismantle it. Instead, now he's talking about delaying it, controlling it, but not stopping it, not dismantling. Those words aren't there anymore. We know that a world where Iran has a nuclear weapon, either for them to use or to give to terrorists, is a world that is less safe, less stable, and less secure. So Republicans are committed to stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and making sure the American public has their voices heard. Today in the committee, if there are efforts to water down the bipartisan bill, I'll be there with amendments to actually beef it up. But our main concern is to protect the American people, and we know that in Iran with a nuclear weapon is a danger to the American people. We want to make sure that the American people's voices are heard.
It was good for a lot of us to be home this time for a couple of weeks, with the first time in a long time to really have a list of things to talk about that the Senate had either done or was about to do. The getting rid of this phony SGR pay for, the handful of other things are in that bill that, like so many other things in the last Congress, were just kicked down the road to 6 months or a year, had to still be dealt with. Probably nothing bigger than the budget. The budget would have gotten a lot of attention if we hadn't passed it. Didn't get much attention when we did, but it did get attention to the people we work for when you say, for really the first time in a long time, we're trying to get back to where this business is done, the people's business is done, the way it should be done. I think only one time in the last 5 years did the Senate even vote on a budget under the other majority, and they only did that because it wouldn't have been paid if they hadn't voted on the budget that had no intention of becoming a final budget. So hopefully that last item on the list of things we hope to go through here in the very near future, getting conferees, getting a budget that the House and Senate agrees to that give you all the tools that you only have with the budget. Like I said, only one time in 5 years did the Senate vote on a budget. I think in the 35 years before that, with maybe one exception, the House and the Senate passed a budget, each of them did, every year. And with fewer than a handful of times, the House and Senate agreed on a budget every year. The law requires it. People should be seeing what we're doing. And it was nice to be in Missouri for a couple of weeks talking every day about what we were doing, what we had tried to do, and what we were about to do, rather than why the Senate wasn't doing anything.
We're at the 100-day mark of this new Congress, and I think it's appropriate to reflect at this point on the question of whether elections do have consequences. The American people voted for change last November, and I would have to salute the new majority leader and this team for showing to the American people that elections do have consequences. And to reiterate some of the things that my colleagues have mentioned, before midnight tonight, we will have passed not just the annual doc fix, but a permanent fix to this SGR problem that we've had for over a decade and a half. We will have accomplished that under the leadership of Senator McConnell and the Republicans in the House and Senate. It is significant that we have passed a balanced budget that balances within 10 years. It will be seen in the next few days that we'll come to conference with the House on that balanced budget resolution, which gets us to balance within 10 years. And then after that, we're going to see the process opened up with budget caps in place for each of our appropriation bills and open votes on each of the appropriation measures, that the sort of thing that we haven't had during the past 8 years of the other party controlling this body. The American people at the end of the day will be able to see how their elected senators stand on these discretionary spending issues. There'll be an open amendment process, and I would just commend the leader and this team and say to the American people, you voted for change, and part of what you voted for was to open up the process, and we are beginning to do that with accomplishments.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions.
Sir, Senator Sessions says the SGR legislation will raise the debt by $200 billion. Is he correct?
Well, I think, like any bill of this magnitude, there are strengths and weaknesses. Let me point out the part of it that I think is really significant. As most of you know, I was in a number of different negotiations with the Vice President surrounding debt ceilings and tax rates expiring. In every one of those, I brought up the issue of means testing for Medicare to sustain the program for a longer period of time. You know that if you take a step like that, you get enormous savings in the out years. There is significant means testing of Medicare in this SGR fix. Not a whole lot of it scores in the early years, but we know that if we make Medicare or Social Security eligibility changes, we tend to leave them alone. In other words, they actually happen. And so I think that issue alone commends the bill, not to mention the fact that on something like 17 occasions we've gone through these so-called short-term fixes under which we have largely whacked providers far beyond what I think was appropriate. So, yeah, there are, like any large bill, it's a mixed bag in some respects, but I think on the whole it's a bill well worth supporting. And we also need to pass it today, and I think most of our members understand that.
So we may follow up. Do you anticipate bringing forward an amendment that will include a requiring a for?
Yeah, we're working on a consent agreement now that would give some amendments to both sides. Honestly, it's my hope that the amendments are not approved because we need to get this bill down to the President for signature before midnight, and I'm optimistic and hopeful we'll be able to do that.
Senator McConnell,
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton announced her candidacy for president on Sunday. She's now trying to recast herself as a champion for everyday Americans. Can I get your reaction to that? And also on your side, a number of your colleagues also announced that they're running for president. Do any of those stand out to you? Do you plan to endorse anytime soon?
Let me just say this about the likely Democratic nominee. The notion that support for her would be a support for change is frankly laughable. She represents the views of this administration. She was a part of this administration. I think the overriding issue in 2016 is going to be whether Americans are happy, content with the condition of our country at home and our position overseas. If the American public is happy with where we are at home, an average about 2% growth rate, a typical middle-income family $3,000 worse off now than when the president came to office, and if they're comfortable with America's current position of influence around the world, then maybe Secretary Clinton will win. But I think the country, as is frequently the case after 8 years of one administration, is ready to go in a different direction. And with regard to our nominees, we've got a great bunch. Thanks.